A Soviet officer was seconds away from launching a nuclear weapon. If he had said yes, World War III might have begun that day. Millions could have died, but one man refused. And what happened next may be the reason you're alive today. October 27, 1962. Deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, a Soviet submarine drifts in total darkness. No contact with Moscow. No clear orders. No understanding of what is happening above the surface. Only silence, then pressure and fear. Outside, American warships drop explosive charges into the sea. The crew inside believes one thing. The war may have already started, and they may already be too late. What no one realizes is that the fate of the world now depends on a single decision inside that submarine. To understand how humanity reached this moment, we have to go back. After World War II, the world did not return to peace. It split into two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both emerged as victors over Nazi Germany. But instead of unity came distrust. And for the first time in history, humanity now possessed weapons capable of ending civilization. Nuclear weapons. By the early 1960s, both sides had enough firepower to destroy the planet many times over. Historians like Martin J. Sherwin described this period as a balance of terror, because peace no longer meant safety. It meant mutual fear. Every decision was made under the shadow of annihilation. Tensions escalated through Berlin crises, arms races, and proxy wars. But the most dangerous moment was still ahead. It began in Cuba. In 1959, Fidel Castro took power after a revolution. At first, relations with the United States were uncertain, but they quickly collapsed. The Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 changed everything. A failed attempt by U.S.-backed forces to overthrow Castro. After that, Castro became convinced another invasion was coming, so he turned to the Soviet Union for protection. And Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev saw an opportunity. The United States had placed nuclear missiles close to Soviet borders in Europe. So Khrushchev asked a simple question. If they can place missiles near us, why can't we place missiles near them? What followed was one of the most secretive military operations in history. Operation Inadir. Thousands of Soviet troops were shipped to Cuba. Missile systems were hidden under cover of deception. Nuclear warheads were transported across oceans, all just 90 miles from Florida, close enough to strike major American cities in minutes. For months, no one in Washington knew, until October 14, 1962. An American U-2 spy plane flew over Cuba and took photographs that changed the world. Missile sites, launch equipment, nuclear-capable weapons under construction. When the intelligence reached Washington, the crisis began instantly. President John F. Kennedy was informed, and what followed inside the White House was one of the most intense political debates in modern history. A secret group was formed, ExComm, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. For days, they met in sealed rooms, arguing over one question. What do we do now? Military generals demanded immediate air strikes. Others pushed for a full invasion of Cuba. They argued that hesitation would make America look weak. But Kennedy saw something else. If the United States attacked Cuba, the Soviet Union might respond, and that response could become nuclear war. According to recordings later released, Kennedy repeatedly asked one question: what happens next? Because every option led to escalation. Eventually, Kennedy chose a middle path, a naval blockade, officially called a quarantine. No Soviet ships carrying weapons would be allowed into Cuba. On October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the American people. Millions watched in silence. And for the first time, ordinary citizens realized something terrifying. They were no longer living in a Cold War. They were living in a countdown. Across the United States, panic spread. Fallout shelters were prepared. Families stored food and water. Schools practiced nuclear drills. Across Europe, governments went on alert, and the world waited. American warships moved into position. Soviet ships approached Cuba. Every commander knew the truth. One mistake could end everything. Then came October 27th, Black Saturday, the most dangerous day of the entire crisis. It began with chaos. An American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba. Its pilot was killed instantly. Military leaders demanded retaliation. Pressure on Kennedy intensified. At the same time, another U-2 accidentally entered Soviet airspace near Alaska. Soviet fighters scrambled. American jets were prepared to respond. Two superpowers. Multiple incidents. No clear communication. And escalating tension on every front. But the most dangerous moment was not above ground. It was beneath the ocean. Inside Soviet submarine B-59. The submarine had been underwater for days. Communication with Moscow was lost. The crew was exhausted. Heat inside the vessel was rising. Air was becoming unbearable, and no one knew what was happening on the surface. Then American ships located the submarine. To force it to surface, they began dropping practice depth charges. The explosions were not meant to destroy the submarine, but the crew had no way of knowing that. Inside B-59, panic spread. Officers believed they were under attack. Many assumed the war had already started. And B-59 carried a nuclear torpedo, a weapon capable of destroying an entire harbor. Captain Valentin Savitsky made a decision. They should prepare the weapon. 2 officers agreed with him. But protocol required unanimous approval from senior command. One final man had to agree. Vasily Arkhipov. Inside that submarine, the pressure was unbearable. No communication. Explosions above. Fear everywhere. And a single decision that could alter history. Savitsky reportedly shouted that war had already begun. He demanded the launch. Arkhipov refused. He argued that they were not under attack, that they needed confirmation before acting. The situation escalated into a direct confrontation. Minutes passed like hours. Then finally, Arkhipov convinced them. No launch. The submarine surfaced. And unknowingly, humanity stepped back from the edge of nuclear war. Most people alive today have never heard his name, but historians widely believe his decision prevented a catastrophic escalation. Meanwhile, above the surface, Kennedy and Khrushchev were working desperately behind the scenes. Secret messages were exchanged. Diplomatic backchannels opened. Both leaders understood the danger. Both wanted an exit. Eventually, a deal was reached. The Soviet Union would remove its missiles from Cuba. The United States would publicly promise not to invade Cuba. Privately, another agreement was made regarding American missiles in Turkey. Slowly, the crisis began to end. Soviet ships turned around. Missile sites were dismantled, and the world stepped back from the brink. For 13 days, civilization stood closer to nuclear destruction than at any other known point in history. Not because anyone wanted war, but because fear, assumptions, and miscalculations pushed the world toward disaster. And in the middle of it all, the most important decision was not made in the White House, not in the Kremlin, not by generals or presidents. It was made inside a submarine, by a man who refused to act on fear. Vasily Arkhipov. One decision, one refusal, one moment that may have saved the world. And today, we live in the world that survived it. If you want more stories like this, moments where history almost changed forever, subscribe to the channel. Because history is not only what happened, it is also what almost happened. Inside that submarine, nobody truly knew what was happening above them. Communication with Moscow had been lost for days. The temperature inside B-59 was rising. Oxygen was running low, and the crew was exhausted after being submerged for an extended period without rest or clear orders. Outside, American warships were not attacking, but the Soviet crew didn't know that. To force the submarine to surface, U.S. forces were dropping small practice depth charges into the water. They were meant as signals, warnings, but inside the submarine, they sounded like real explosions, and the psychological pressure was breaking the crew. Many officers began to believe only one thing. The war had already started. Back in Washington, President John F. Kennedy was facing a completely different crisis at the same time. Military advisors were pushing for immediate retaliation after the downing of a U-2 spy plane over Cuba. Some generals believed this was the moment to strike before the situation escalated further. But Kennedy hesitated. He understood something terrifying. Every action now could trigger a chain reaction that neither side could control. At the same time, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev was receiving conflicting reports from his own military commanders. Some were urging him to stand firm. Others were warning that escalation could lead to nuclear exchange. Both leaders were essentially blind, reacting to partial information, fear, and pressure. And while world leaders debated in secret rooms, deep underwater, inside B-59, a far more immediate decision was unfolding. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, believed they were under attack. He gave the order to prepare the nuclear torpedo. One strike, he thought, might be necessary to defend themselves. 2 officers agreed with him. But protocol required unanimous consent from the senior command group. Only one man stood in the way, Vasily Arkhipov. He argued that there was no confirmed war, that surfacing and waiting for instructions was the only rational choice. Tension inside the submarine escalated rapidly. Shouting replaced discussion. Fear replaced logic. Minutes felt like hours. Then, finally, the decision came. Arkhipov refused to approve the launch. He insisted they surface immediately instead of firing. Slowly, reluctantly, the crew complied. The nuclear torpedo was never launched. B-59 rose to the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, and the world, without knowing it, had just stepped back from the edge of nuclear war.